we may need to quote you on some of this and use it in our own marketing, to be honest.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Really exciting episode for you today. We're going to be looking to the future into 2025. But before we get into the episode, of course, if you are enjoying That's What I Call Marketing and can rate, review our episodes, it really does help us. It takes a few seconds. So if you can give us a 5-star review, it would be really appreciated, and it continues to grow this amazing community of marketers just like you. And if you are interested in getting involved with That's What I Call Marketing, you can take a look at our 2025 sponsorship kit. It is on that'swhatIcallmarketing.com/sponsor, or just drop us a note and we can have a conversation. Well, on to today's episode, and I am joined by Imaad Ahmed. He is the head of the WARC Advisory, EMEA. This is a service designed to get to the heart of marketers' challenges and find the evidence to help them grow their businesses. He presents globally at industry events all across EMEA. You'll see him in places like the Festival of Marketing. He's got 15 years of marketing experience and has been with WARC for over 10 years. So today we are going to talk, well, first of all, a bit about WARC. If you don't know about WARC, we're going to talk about it, the platform. I'm a huge fan of WARC. I got to use it an incredible amount in previous roles, and it's really such an amazing resource for marketers. So not an ad, but I am going to talk to Imaad just a bit about that, so you understand the power of it as a tool for you and your marketing team. But more importantly, we are going to talk about the headwinds in marketing. What is coming up for marketers and what they need to start thinking about in 2025. There are so many great insights from the WARC report on this, and we are going to get a deep dive in with Imaad today, directly hearing from him about this report. So let's get straight into this episode and hear what's ahead for you as a marketer in 2025.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. Really appreciate it. I know it's a busy time of year for everybody. But look, can we start? Maybe give a quick introduction and you can tell us a bit about your role.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Imaad Ahmed. So I head up WARC Advisory in EMEA and Americas. I've been at WARC since 2013. Joined initially as a marketing director or marketing head. Moved over to WARC Advisory a few years ago. WARC's been around for nearly 4 decades or so, helping brands, agencies, media owners making essentially more informed, evidence-based decisions around kind of where their marketing can be more effective. And the advisory team gets involved with particular problems or challenges that our clients might have. And typically we work with them around helping to land a certain message in the market through kind of evidence-based thought leadership. Yeah. We might help them compare against their category in terms of benchmarking and so on, or we might go into certain client teams and help educate or upskill them around some of the fundamentals of marketing effectiveness, all particular niches that they're looking to move their strategy towards in the coming years.
I've said it before, like I've used WARC a lot and it's a phenomenal resource. Like, 4 decades, it feels like there's just 4 decades of brilliant information on the platform. And then, as you say, this advisory service now as well. It's incredibly extensive resource for marketers. And I just think if marketers aren't aware of it, what's great about it as well is, look, there is some pre-paywall stuff. So there is stuff that you can get in and have a look, and there's information there even if you're not a paid subscriber. But for me, it was one of the most valuable resources that I had when I was in a global marketing role. Because if you're trying to figure something out about a market, or you're trying to figure something out about a category, there's going to be stuff in there, maybe not specific to the exact category that you're looking at, but it could be market specific. And just a great way of kind of even building a case of evidence for something that you're trying to do within your marketing organization. Someone's done it before, right? And so I always found it was the place to find the information about someone who's had the same challenge or facing the same issue as you.
Well, we may need to quote you on some of this and use it in our own marketing, to be honest. But no, that's great to hear. Yeah, we're always kind of happy to help our clients, as you say, kind of make more evidence-based, kind of informed decisions, but also just make the case for marketing with some of that evidence that we can provide.
Yeah, it's a great resource. So I'm definitely encouraging people to go check it out if they haven't. But look, we're at that moment in the year where we all reflect, we look back and we look forward and we predict. But WARC bring out the toolkit every year. And obviously we're going to talk about the 2025 Marketers Toolkit. But I'd love to just kind of maybe touch first on the 2024 toolkit, because
Mhm.
look, we can't see around corners, but I always love these kind of moments of looking ahead. When you think about 2024 and the toolkit that was brought out this time last year, how does it kind of marry up to kind of some of the big pain points that marketers have felt this year? Was it pretty aligned?
Yeah, I mean, we're quite lucky with the toolkit in that, I think it's the 14th year now that we're going to be running the toolkit for the toolkit 2025. And so kind of over the years, we've honed the way to just get more in tune really with what's going to come up in the following year, and what marketers are excited about, what they're worried about, and so on. And so there are various ways that we do that. So we've got kind of a framework that we call GEIST, which looks at kind of government, economy, industry, society, technology, and environment. And we use that, if you like, as our lens. And then we survey marketers, we run interviews with marketers, we use all the brain power within our editorial team to look at an analysis, if you like, of what's come up through the year. And so we've tended to get better and better at kind of
Yeah.
predicting the right trends. So when we launched the toolkit for 2024, we picked out 5 trends. So we've seen to varying degrees things like masculinity in crisis, or sports washing, or community-based sustainability. That those were 3 of the trends, and they have kind of kicked on to varying degrees in 2024. One that we picked out, which I think everyone watching or tuning into this podcast will agree has definitely kicked on, is the potential of AI
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
the impact that's having. And I'm sure we'll talk about that
Yeah.
a lot more. But the one that I've been really interested in this year, and again, kind of to be expected, was this idea of preparing for polarization, which was one of the trends we picked out. And if you look at that in the context of the recent US presidential elections, it'll be really interesting to see from a marketing perspective how that election
Yeah.
paid out. And this is when we think about political ad spend, about $11 billion
Yeah.
gets spent
It's
on political ad spend.
insane.
So it is quite a significant moment, if you
Yeah.
like, and contributor to the industry as a whole. But it was interesting to see just how that played out through a marketing lens. So if you think about not only the scale of the spend, but you look at how the two parties look to tap into culture,
Hmm.
through using cultural icons, Taylor Swift, Beyonce on one side,
Yeah.
Elon Musk on the other, how they approach their messaging as well was different.
Very. Yeah.
Ultimately, the Democrats spent more on advertising than the Republicans did, even though the Democrats lost. And also, like one thing that I found really interesting, and we've done a fair bit of work on kind of digital audio and the gap between consumption and spend on digital audio. But one thing that was interesting in this presidential cycle was just the growing prominence of podcasting, and podcast as a
Yeah.
platform to tap into culture, but also reach audiences that you wanted to reach to spread the right message that you wanted to spread as part of your political campaign. So again, kind of lots of interesting ways of looking at the presidential election through a marketing perspective.
Yeah, it is really interesting because at that level of spend, you get some like the insights are true. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not,
Mm.
they're big tests in terms of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
marketing
that's fair.
test, right? That's a lot of money, and it's like I was fascinated with that, the communications element of that
Mm,
election, and whether you agree or disagree with
sure.
things that are said on either side. And I'm not in the States, so I'm not going to comment on that, but I think maybe clarity of messaging for me was something that I felt came through for the winning side,
Mm.
and that's maybe an important message for marketers. But listen, let's not get into politics too much. Yeah, and we're yeah, here in Ireland, we're just out of an election. So anyway, we'll see how that one plays out. Less controversial, surprisingly.
Okay.
Uh, you may not have heard anything about it. But listen, we'll go into the 2025 toolkit, and there's 5 big themes. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe we can go through each of them. Well, we'll get through as many of them as we can, and people can kind of dig through the rest. But the first was around the economy and
Mhm.
maybe that economic reset. Like the economy's kind of on a better path, but consumers still have worries about the economy, the stability. I think it was something like 72% of those surveys said that economic conditions are having an impact on their marketing strategy. So what was the learning and some of the things that you felt were important in that piece around the economic reset?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is that, after years of flux, if you like, within the economy brought about by the pandemic, higher interest rates, higher inflation rates, and so on, what we are seeing is a return to some form of economic stability, which means that hopefully marketers can be a bit more proactive in their planning rather
Yeah.
than reactive. So, if you look at, the IMF data telling us that inflation is going to come down to 4.5%, we're looking at things like growth projected at 3.2% from the OECD, and even within marketing, global ad spend is going to top $1 trillion
Yeah.
for the first time. So there's lots of indicators for optimism amongst marketers, and even amongst the thousand or so marketers that we surveyed, 65% of them told us that they thought business was going to be better
Right.
in
Okay.
2025 than it was in 2024. But when we think of that economic prosperity, and again, we've just talked about the presidential
Yeah.
elections, and some of that kind of plays into this, but and that distribution of economic growth or prosperity is obviously
Hmm.
different from country to country. And so, in terms of like how brands think about it, obviously it depends on the category they're operating in, it depends on the market they're operating in, but hopefully the economic conditions are there to make more of it an impact across all four of the P's
Yeah.
than say just the promotion P, as marketers in many categories and so on have kind of settled in, if you like, in recent years. And when we're thinking about like how to make the most of the economic reset, it comes back to some of the fundamentals. It comes back to marketing's role in understanding the customer in their category,
Yeah.
in their market, and the insight that's needed there. So marketing can really be the voice, if you like, for a business as to like what the customer behaviors are, what their needs are, what their attitudes are, what the media landscape is looking like, how that all sits within the economic context. Marketing can really play a critical role in informing the business strategy within that
Yeah.
economic context. And I think that presents a whole host of opportunities then for marketers.
Yeah, and you mentioned the four Ps there, and there's been
Mm.
definitely conversations this year around the four Ps and marketers' role in all of them. And probably,
Mhm.
maybe the call out for 25 is we need to get back control of, not control, but involvement in some of them. And one of the things that I was, obviously interesting is kind of price and pricing,
Mhm.
and maybe the difference between the two. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are basically just going to be a compilation of some of the great stuff that I've heard from people
Which
much
is
smarter than
fine.
me. So when you talked about kind of price and pricing, kind of as an opening statement there. There was a great session from Mark Ritson in Cannes on one of the walk stages where he talks about this difference between kind of price and pricing. But he talks about, and again, kind of going back to what we just talked about a moment ago, using price research and customer research to better
Yeah.
understand the perceived value of a product or service, and then using that understanding of perceived value to then help set the price. Price is just the tag on the
Yeah.
product or the service. Pricing is all the thinking behind how you link that to a perception of value. And, again, like, it's a huge opportunity for marketers to use our role within customer insight generation, customer research, to then really nail that perception of value and feed that back into how we price things up. But if you look at a lot of the data out there, and again, kind of borrowing from some great stuff, this time from Magic Number Set, so
Yeah.
Dr. Grace Kite, incredibly smart
Yes.
lady, incredibly smart team that she has at Magic Numbers. They ran a study looking at the link between advertising, brand, and the ability to charge a price
Yeah.
premium. So what they did was they looked at different bands of annual ad spend, so like under £1.5 million, different bands then, and then like over £3 million worth of annual ad spend. And what they looked at was, if you dropped the price by 1% at those different bands of ad spend, what would happen?
Yeah.
And what they found was that the lowest band of ad spend, the sales volume would drop by about 1.8%, and the highest band of ad spend, the sales would drop by about 1.2%, so less in terms of volume. So brands who are advertising more just were less price
Yeah.
sensitive, and therefore could charge better price premiums without actually impacting sales volumes as much. And that's like really interesting,
I
really
think
important,
so.
because when we think about like some of the great stuff that McKinsey have done as well, linking 1% increase in price translates to about an 8% increase in profits. you can see kind of the impact and connection between branding power and pricing
Yeah.
power. And yet, like, one of the things that we found in our marketer survey was that like 25% of marketers have no involvement in
I
pricing
know.
at all,
Yeah.
and only like 20% have like the primary involvement in it too. So although there's lots of data to suggest that it's a really powerful lever, a really powerful lever towards profitability,
Yeah.
which is kind of one of the things that resonates the most amongst the C-suite, actually marketers aren't involved in it as much as we should be.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was reading something, it was on more recently, about even price comparison websites, and it was, I think it was Direct Line's Churchill and Privilege brands. And when people went to a price comparison website, they chose Churchill over Privilege, even when the price was the same, because Churchill's was a more known, trusted, stronger brand because it spent more on advertising. So, like, even when you're on the same in pricing, like, the stronger brand is going to win out, right? So kind of,
Yeah, and that's a lot of, a lot of that is the power of the brand, familiarity.
yeah,
There's a lot of behavioral science that you can bring into this. We just tend to trust things that we are more familiar
yeah,
with, and
like
that, in
human
essence,
nature.
is
Yeah,
kind of,
yeah,
yeah, the power of brand and kind of, spending on brand, spending consistently for long periods of time on your brand platforms, and spreading that across a number of channels. That's all in service of building up
yeah.
that familiarity and trust. So those memory networks are doing what the brand want them to do.
Yeah, and that's such an important point as well. Like, it needs to do what you need it to do. We're going to move on to the second round. Like, we spend like actually the whole hour on each of these, but the experience gap, like, this is really interesting, right? So the disconnect, and this kind of touches probably on some of the stuff we talked about earlier about marketing's role in some of the things that are really important, is disconnect between marketing and consumer experience. There's a $3.7 trillion disconnect, and that's due to kind of customer service levels continuing to drop. Now, one of the things that comes through in this piece is the idea of the promise to the customer. Now, I know you've been heavily involved in that. I'd love to hear about the promise to the customer and how marketing can have a stronger role in that experience gap and the disconnect.
Cool. Yeah. So I suppose, just to set the scene firstly, as you mentioned, the size of the prize is huge, right? Because there's this $3.7 trillion dollar amount at risk when customers are cutting spend or switching brands because of poor experience. And that's a Qualtrics stat. And one of the things that we found was that marketers, when we look at all the customer facing aspects of a business, marketing doesn't manage many of them
Yeah,
and actually has no involvement in some of them. So, marketing has varying in levels of involvement in things like customer service and support, or product and feature development, product UX, payment, pricing, that kind of stuff, where again it comes back to this idea of not being involved across the 4Ps. Now, just to your point on the promise to the customer, so I was lucky enough to work with Mimi Turner and
yeah,
Jan Schwartz at LinkedIn,
yeah,
hugely kind of smart minds in our industry, but also Roger Martin as well, who's a kind of
yeah,
CEO advisor, strategy expert, again, incredibly clever. And what we wanted to look at was this idea of a promise to the customer. So that's a direct commitment made by a business to the buyers or users of its brands. And the idea was that where that promise to the customer is memorable, where it's kind of valuable, and where it's deliverable, would campaigns that had a promise to the customer be more effective than campaigns that didn't?
yeah,
And so what we did, WARC's been collecting case studies of effectiveness for many years now. And these are typically entered into awards. Some of them win awards. So it's quite a high bar of quality, if you
yeah.
like, for these different campaign case studies. And we started last year actually by looking at B2C predominantly. And we took about 2,000 or so case studies. We looked at them and we firstly split them into those that had a promise to the customer at the heart of them
Right.
and those that didn't. So about 40% of them had a promise to the customer, the remaining 60% didn't. And then we wanted to compare the two. So using the case study data and the types of metrics that those case studies were reporting on, we were able to see that the campaigns with a customer promise at the heart of them were more likely to report on brand health metric increases,
Yeah.
more likely to report on increases in commercial
The important
advantages
one.
like
Yeah.
market share, penetration, that kind of stuff. But also when you controlled it for size, so when you kind of looked at something that we call creative equipment, so the budget, the duration of a campaign, the spread of the media, how would those campaigns compare against one another at the different levels of creative equipment? And what we found was that promise to the customer not only over index versus non-promise at every level of creative equipment, but actually it was at the lower levels of creative equipment that it over indexed even more. So that kind of
Wow.
gives you a hint at an opportunity for some of those scale up brands, some of those brands with fewer
Yes.
resources, where actually perhaps this could be a great equalizer. And then we carried out the same study in the B2B space. We found there are even fewer customer promises in B2B, so even more kind of opportunity to differentiate. But again, the same things bore out. So brand health advantages, commercial advantages, and even greater advantages at lower levels of creative equipment.
And it's interesting that there's fewer in B2B. Given
Mm,
so many B2B organizations are product led, you know what I mean? Like it is about a product, and it is about, like, some of them are big, purchases that take 18 months to go through procurement. Like, it feels like a promise. It's like something fundamental, because you're making some sort of a promise based on the product. So it's a huge
mhm.
opportunity. Have you any kind of like top, and I'll put you on the spot, but like top of mind kind of examples of a promise to the customer that you kind of has stood out for you, that you kind of go, this was a great one, a great example of it? Because as you say, it's not just about communicating it, it's about it
Mhm.
being everything the brand stands for in lots of ways, but it's not about purpose either, I think, is a distinction, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's interesting you picked out this idea of product based messaging because ultimately, when we looked at B2B, and we look at the different types of promise within B2B, product based was actually the biggest category, if you like, of promises, even though
Yeah.
there were relatively few of them in that B2B space. But yeah, you look at things like some of the stuff that Workday have done
Yeah.
about being a rock star. So again, like taking an emotional element, but also a product element, and then kind of talking to what working with that kind of platform can
Yeah.
do for you. There was BT and Enterprise on like unbreakable Wi-Fi, again, like a very auditable promise that BT were making, which again made that stand out. And then in the B2C space, again, there were quite a few. The Snickers satisfies one is probably an example that gets used in lots of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
conversations for
Everywhere.
lots of
Fame,
different things.
consistency, like it's everything,
Um,
isn't it?
but again, if you look back at like those three elements of a customer promise, like is it memorable? Yes. Was it valuable? Yes. And is it auditable? Yes,
Yeah.
because it will satisfy our hunger more often than not, right? So yeah, like some really cool examples, and yeah, they're all available on in those white papers that are on Walk.
And is simplicity an important factor of it? Like, does it need to be something that's
Mm.
easy to communicate both internally and externally? You are listening to That's What I Call Marketing.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and a great tee up actually to some of the value of customer promise as well, because what we found was that there were two big reasons around why custom promises can help close the gap. The first one was thinking about the dynamics of a corporate environment, if you like. So, when you think about the power of a brand, if you got 100 marketers in a room and asked them to describe what brand is or what
Yeah,
branding
yeah,
is, we'd probably all describe it slightly differently. So imagine then taking that outside of the walls of marketing to a C-suite boardroom or something where they don't have the same level of kind of understanding or preconception. So power, part of the power of the promise to customer is that it's just a much simpler way to explain brand, if you
yeah,
like, to the C-suite in language that's more likely to be understood and more easy to communicate at a C-suite level. But secondly, thinking of it as a kind of business strategic play and a way of unifying across different departments, so across sales, across customer service, across product, and so on. Again, it's just much easier to understand, are we delivering on the promise that we've made to the
yeah,
customer, and using that, if you like, as a North Star, whether you're in marketing or whether you're in one of the other departments, but
yeah.
coming back to, are you providing that kind of experience that we promised? initially. And again, it's a great strategic unifier.
And I love that because, again, when we were talking before about marketers' involvement in customer experience and all the other elements, you're like, of course, like that's hard because, marketing can't own everything. But this is actually a way of unifying, like, it's very simple question and saying, are we delivering this? And then every person can actually answer yes or no to that question. Like, you know what I mean? It can be as fundamental, as that. So I think it's a wonderful concept, and I think it's going to be one that we're going to hear and see a lot more of, in 2025. I know it's not I don't think it's articulated in the toolkit as a thing that you want to see more, but I do think so, because I think as you say, it shifts the dynamic. And I think language is an important dimension in how we engage with C-suite as well. Like, I'm a huge fan of James Herman's articulation of future demand. I think this is another great way of talking, words that can sometimes be distracting. Like, when you go talk to CFO, CEO about brand, the probably shortcut's going to go, oh my God, they're going to want to make a TV ad, open on a beach and, whatever. Do you know what I mean? And it goes like, so
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
kind of, I love those things that can help shift the conversation and bring it to a different place.
Yeah, I think to your point before, simplicity is so
Yeah.
important, right? And this is a way of simplifying stuff beyond the walls of
Yeah.
marketing, which probably does need simplifying because not everyone will be as invested in some of the brand levers as the
Yeah.
marketing department are. So, how do we communicate that in a way that's going to resonate? And I think this is a good way of doing that.
And probably rightly so. So let's move on to trend number 3 around the digital dilemma. And there's a struggle between brand safety and, I guess, the performance marketing world, right? So the digital channels. I think lots of us feel the pressure that we can't step back from spending on these digital platforms. I mean, anyone who reads anything from Augustine Fu would probably stop spending there immediately, right? But there's a midpoint, I guess, because you fear missing out on performance marketing. I think there's wrong click attribution, really. So how, like, when you're looking at the digital dilemma, how do you think about that kind of balance of safety and performance channels?
When we surveyed marketers, about 40% of them told us that brand safety was going to have a significant impact on how they were going to plan for the coming year. And yet, when we looked at some of the investment data in different ad channels, it's very much concentrated in big tech. So the likes of Alphabet, Amazon, Meta take up about 44% of all global ad spend.
Yeah.
So as you said, you've got that you've got that dynamic, I suppose, at play. And then when we think of brand safety, and we think of brand safety sometimes in kind of social platforms, again, we're seeing like growth in social media ad spend as well. So like 14% year on year growth. And, one of the things that came out of the toolkit, and it's actually some thinking from Billy Ryan at the 7 Stars, was about how marketers can prepare for this era of abundance. And I think that's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interesting because yes, a lot of that spend is concentrated in big tech, but there are also emerging channels which might also factor into your media planning or your media thinking. You think about shoppable ads in TV, you think about the growth of retail
Retail media.
media, the
Yeah.
growth of commerce media, those kinds of things. Some of those are still going to come back to the big tech players, inevitably, but some of them also will give you other routes to communicate with your audiences beyond big tech. And you mentioned about this idea of algorithm planners. I think we're seeing more AI driven kind of performance
Yeah.
marketing tools. We're seeing that become a bigger part of media planning. And so I think to some degree we are going to see a subtle shift almost in the types of skill sets that media planners might just need to be more well versed on. How exactly do they decode some of these AI driven campaign tools? How do they use the right prompts or understand the right prompts to get the kinds of insights they want to get so they can then invest or reinvest their media in the right place? But a lot of it's going to come down to the media quality ultimately.
Yeah.
Are these high attention environments, you know there's a greater call for marketers to deliver both on brand and performance metrics at the same time.
Yeah.
And Walker about to publish something on the multiplier effect in the coming year on that.
Okay.
But also what we're seeing more of is this whole idea of the funnel being more constricted and actually content and commerce starting to converge. So again, like how do brands play in that space and kind of acknowledge that and reflect that in their marketing plans?
Yeah, you touched there on the skills required.
Mm,
Like, I think definitely we're at, like, it's such an interesting moment, and the pace of change. Again, you said at the start there, like 2024, Toolkit talked about AI, and I think where we've got to, that probably wasn't maybe a prediction of where it's gotten to. It's going to be hard to predict where it will be this time next year. But I think about the skill sets that are required, and I think about that now for kind of some of the skill sets that are required for more technical marketers
mhm.
to come in, and maybe in media planners as well. Did that come up at all in kind of that survey? The thoughts that kind of the leadership have around, like, are we set up for the right skill sets going into 2025 and beyond, or do they even know what's going to be required?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the data to
Yeah,
hand, but I mean, it's something that we do look at on Walk from time to time, just this kind of
yeah,
shifting requirement around skill sets, because as whether it's AI or any of the other kind of tech or the other trends that come into play, that how marketers respond to them is going to have to adapt to that, respond to that, and so on. So I think like this undoubted growth in AI is going to mean that the marketers are going to have to adapt to that as well. Some are going to be better suited than others. Ultimately what that means for an org chart, if you like, at a
yeah,
business, we don't
yeah,
quite
yeah.
know
I don't think
yet.
anyone.
But yeah, definitely kind of some understanding of the potential or scope of AI, but also some of the pitfalls of AI
Yeah,
as well is important for marketers just to get better versed on, because all of that stuff, as we saw in the toolkit survey, is going to have some kind of impact on how you plan for the coming year. So what we saw when we looked at the different elements of AI was that 75% thought that it was going to have a greater impact on content creation. 63% thought that AI is going to have a bigger impact on audience tracking.
right.
There was interest in synthetic data and how
Yeah,
you use
yeah.
that to generate insights. So again, like all these different possible tools or levers that marketers didn't really have access to a few years ago, like how do you make the most of that? That is going to be something that the marketers will want to get better versed on, in the coming years, no doubt.
Yeah, and like which ones as well, because
Mm,
there's so many, and we're at that stage now where there's just a growth of potential tools that are out there, and I've seen some of them, and like you talk about, synthetic research stuff is phenomenal. Like, I've seen stuff that can, like, give you results in minutes, and you're just like, oh my
mm,
god, like, But I think
yeah.
having the skill sets, in a marketing team, is really important. And I definitely believe, and I have a belief that the role for agencies in a lot of this is incredibly important, and I
Mm,
think that's where maybe the upskilling can happen in there to support marketing teams. Like, it's an interesting dynamic. I think we're going to see a lot of conversation around it in 2025. I want to talk a bit about the age of atomization. Have I got that right?
mhm.
Atomization.
Yeah, yeah.
This was really interesting and
Mhm,
unexpected, I think, for me when I read it, as kind of one of the big trends maybe going into 2025. So I predicted 10 trillion in consumer spending in Asia and 19.6 trillion in the US will come from
mhm.
people who live on their own.
It's a huge opportunity for marketers. Probably a bigger opportunity in some categories than others. But as you said, just quantifiably, the
Massive.
opportunity is there. When you think about, what was it, in 2023, 484 million single person households existed globally. That's like 20% of all the households
Mm,
around the world, right? And that figure is expected to grow rather than shrink over the coming years. So this is, yeah, as I said, a huge opportunity for brands, more so in certain categories than others. If you think about some of the motivations behind this and some of the behaviors or underlying behaviors as well. So I'm sure much of it driven by the
yeah.
pandemic and kind of lockdown attitudes, how attitudes towards brands might have changed, how digital connectivity has improved, how the efficiency and reliability of the delivery economy has kind of grown
Yeah, yeah.
as well. Like all of these kinds of things mean that there are certain opportunities within things like shopping, dining, entertaining, kind of on your own, that have opened up in recent years, and that's an interesting one for brands to explore.
And a huge percentage of marketers aren't specifically going after this market. Was there any insight into why that is? Like, is it too difficult? Is it, are there, like, what are the barriers to going after it, or just not aware? Maybe like me.
I mean, I think some of it is probably a lack of awareness of just the scale of it and the rate of expected growth of it. But also, I think part of it is going to be, almost like a lack understanding around how to build it into your existing kind of segmentation, or how
Yeah.
you build certain audience cohorts. And some of those are going to be like legacy ways of segmenting your audience that maybe kind of these more atomized or single person households don't fit into as neatly. So some of that will need to adapt. If you think about some of the special kind of preferences or needs of kind of atomized cohorts or single person households, things like smaller product sizes, things like reliable delivery, like I mentioned before, or experiences aimed at solo participants, like all of those things, actually, if you segment in the right way, are levers that certain brands in certain categories could definitely speak to, and therefore serve that cohort much better than they're being served now. And when you look at, again, like some of the data that we saw from the Voice of the Marketer survey, one of the things that came out was this like power of warmth and community as a way to tap into that
Yeah.
cohort better. And so, 38% of the marketers that we surveyed told us that they were developing online brand communities to help build this better connection. 34% of them told us that they were looking at how they could connect kind of online communities with more kind of physical events to kind of bridge that gap. But again, one of the overriding things, to just a note of caution, I suppose, is the authenticity as well with which you approach it,
Yeah.
because there's a difference between atomization and loneliness, and the loneliness epidemic. So there's a connection between the two, but in terms of how you communicate with this audience in the right way, again, certain notes of caution there.
That's a really interesting point, because there's a risk that you run into kind of going, it equals loneliness when it
Mm.
doesn't necessarily, because it's choice. You know what I mean? Like like
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is choice. And
We WARC Advisory and MSQ actually ran like a really cool piece of research earlier this year around the power of rituals
yeah,
and the role that brands have permission, if you like, to play within rituals. And kind of one of the things that we found from a consumer survey of about 4,000 consumers was that almost half of those consumers engage in rituals kind of while they're at home, and by themselves. And these rituals can have, functional benefits, can have emotional benefits, but again, it comes back to this idea of participating in some of these experiences by yourself. And the interesting thing that we saw with some of that ritual research was that 72% of consumers incorporate brands within their rituals, and 39% of them feel more positively towards a brand once they've actually brought the brand within their
right.
ritual. And so there's real potential there for brands if they're able to sit within the ritual appropriately, to actually then be part of that consumer's life, or have access to that consumer's life for quite a long period of time, because rituals, once they first present themselves, become ingrained in our
Yeah.
in our everyday lives. So it's interesting kind of to see how exactly that might play out, and the opportunities brands might have in that space.
It's brilliant. And did an episode recently with Dr. Marcus Collins, and he
Yeah.
talks a lot about this. And actually, really interesting nugget from him was when he was working on Beyonce's work, and
Mm.
they tried to create a community for Beyonce, but the community was somewhere else. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So it's about understanding that and kind of not trying to insert yourself, but
Yeah.
find the right place.
So we actually interviewed Marcus for the
Okay.
rituals paper. Yeah, Marcus has some kind of great insights, great stories. I've never written a love song. I know Marcus has, or kind of been friends with Boys to Men or whatever. So I'm kind of setting the bar much lower than he did on your podcast. But one of the findings that we got from the rituals research was this idea of, brands who want to play effectively in that space are well advised to, how we termed it, kind of observe, facilitate, and then participate. So observe how your customers or your audience are just behaving naturally. When the moment is right and when you've got permission, then to facilitate some of those rituals and make those ritual experiences better
Yeah.
for your consumers. and then to actively participate them again when you've got permission. And that's almost a counterpoint to this idea of brands necessarily trying to set the ritual and
Yeah.
dictate the ritual. Because I mean, there are some examples of that, but this observe, facilitate, participate is probably a better route to follow.
No, yeah, definitely, because you can. I think any of us can think of moments where you're like, yeah, you shouldn't be there. Like, this isn't your space.
Yeah, yeah.
So look, everybody's thinking ahead to the year. Like, people are deep, if not already finished planning for 2025. All the joyous moments of,
Mm,
spreadsheets flying around marketing departments and, bottom up, tops down, all the fun
mhm.
stuff everyone's doing. Um, and there's lots in this, lots of information that's useful. And I think for me, what's really useful about it is it's not like a specific like tactical thing that you need to put into your marketing plan. You know what I mean? It's thematic. It's how you need to think. But from your perspective, looking at kind of the toolkit for next year, are there any kind of areas that you think marketers taking all this on board should focus their time and effort on with all the other things they have to do?
Yeah, I suppose it comes back to some of the fundamentals, but in light of some of these themes or trends that we're seeing. So, if you look at the economic reset, if you look at closing the experience gap, the digital dilemma, atomization, context is everything in each of those, right? And so, like, how marketers can better understand the economic context, the customer context, the media context. All of that is going to come about through customer insight,
Mm.
which I know is a very kind of fundamental element of effective marketing. But it's kind of looking at that fundamental through the light of some of these trends that we're talking about here. And there was an interesting interview with Ian Borden, who's the CFO at McDonald's in Cannes, and he said that basically what he wants from his marketing team is strategy that's rooted in really rock solid customer insight or
Yeah.
consumer insight. That's the kind of stuff that he can then sign off on, take a bit more risk around because he knows it's baked into solid customer
Yeah.
insight. And I think that's kind of a useful reminder almost for marketers to think about how you build out this picture of the context for your business. And again, like speaking about something that we mentioned a moment ago, and marketing's role across the four P's beyond promotion. Again, like that's really important because if you think of pricing, product place, we talked about the experience gap and how
Yeah.
marketers aren't necessarily involved in some of those elements when we think of the customer kind of facing aspects of a business. But like, how can marketing provide some of the insight there? Again, that's going to bring that knowledge of the customer back to the business and then also use that to inform strategy in a way that's going to expand like marketing's own strategic value to the C-suite. and,
Yeah.
and some of the stuff that the promise to the customer work does, some of the stuff that Mark Ritson talked about in terms of perception of value and marketing as a route to understanding that perception of value better. Like that's all really important when marketers think about their involvement and their role within all four P's and
Yeah.
beyond just that promotion P.
Yeah, it reminds me, I just did an episode with Sarah Higgins, who's the jury chair for B2B Eurobest.
Mm,
And
mhm.
it was a brilliant moment. She goes, yeah, no, I talk to customers. It feels a bit 1980s, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that all marketers probably don't do enough of,
Yeah,
to be really honest. And it's striking, but it means there's a huge amount of opportunity there as well, right? For marketers who do understand the customer well
yeah,
and then are actually using that, as I said, across all four Ps, there's a huge amount of opportunity and potential there.
definitely. So looking ahead for 2025 for you, obviously the work you do, some of it takes time and planning. And what are some things you're working on that you're excited about for that you can reveal for 2025 teasers?
Yeah, I mean, we're quite fortunate in that the toolkit is obviously kind of a flagship moment for Walk. We've got actually a new report coming out, a new piece of research coming out early next year on the multiplier effect, which talks about this balance between kind of brand and performance. On the advisory side, it'll be interesting to see where some of the research we've done around
Yeah,
rituals or customer promises, where that might go next, because both of those are really rich kind of areas for us. We've also done some work recently with Edelman on earned media as well. And so interested to see where that might go. But yeah, as I said, kind of always interested really to see kind of what our clients' problems are in light of some of these trends that we've talked
Yeah.
about through the toolkit, but also just generally, and seeing how we can help them along with those in the coming year, but also, yeah, years to come.
And it must be great to have those moments where, client problem and you're able to dig into the deep WARC reservoir or resource and go and help and see the outcomes of being able to solve, or at least get to points where they can bring it forward in the business and try fix or solve the
Hmm.
problems. Like, that's probably why you're at WARC so long, because it's like it's an amazing
Yeah,
rewarding
no.
role.
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of it, yeah, a bit of a marketing geek, to be honest. So if I wasn't kind of just surrounded by this content on a daily basis, I'd probably go and search it out
Yeah,
myself.
you'd be like me reading
Uh,
WARC all the time. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So no, it's really interesting. It's really cool to kind of, I suppose, just give our clients a different point of view or a different point of evidence that might just provoke an idea or a
Yeah.
thought as to like how they might approach something, and then trying to help them just consolidate that idea or just shine a light on a particular opportunity that they may have not been as aware of in the past. Like that's always like a great part of my job, if you like, kind of hearing that from clients and then trying to bounce ideas with them as to like where do we take this problem next and how do we go about solving it.
Amazing, amazing. Well, it's been brilliant chatting to you, Emma. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And aside from anything else, like, I mean, I'm just, as we're going through, I'm like, how on earth is he remembering all these data points? Because you haven't once looked at a note. And I was just so impressed by your encyclopedic knowledge of all the work data, because there's a ton of it. So really appreciate you taking us through the 2025 Marketers Toolkit. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what else comes out from work in 25.
Great. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Been such a fascinating chat. So thanks very much.
Thanks a million. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. It was really great to kind of get the insight from Imaad. Like, there is so much going on for us in marketing, and there's, headwinds that we see coming, there's headwinds we don't see coming. There is, increased digitalization, the use of AI technology is definitely, it's embedded in everything we talked about today. And it was great to hear Imaad say, look, if there's one thing you do as a marketer, maybe where do you focus your time and efforts? And I think that's going to be different for everybody. We're all facing different challenges, different opportunities in terms of our scaling, our growth, mature brands, new brands. So it's a really detailed report, lots of insight in it. And it's great to hear firsthand from Imaad about those insights and what it means for you as a marketer. So I really hope you found this useful episode. Please do share it with other people on your team who may not have heard of. I do think it's incredibly useful for us at this time of year to really think about what's ahead. We can't see around corners, but we can get prepared for what we know may be coming. And WARC have just a ton of data and evidence to help support their point of view. And you heard at the start where they think things went in 2024 and how that went for them. So that is it for today's episode. Of course, there is another new episode coming out next Tuesday. We have an incredible episode with Red Sea, and we're going to be looking, yes, at the Christmas campaigns this year. And of course, we're going to be looking at some of the other campaigns that have scored really well with them on their Red Star Index. We are going to continue to have a look back on the year and into 2025 with some global marketers, my friends at the Sleeping Barber podcast and Marketing Architects. We're going to get back together and just have a look. And what's great is it's going to give you kind of a global perspective on what's happening in Canada, the US, and of course here in Europe. So hope you enjoy that episode. Do tune in for that. So do join me every Tuesday for new episodes of That's What I Call Marketing. If you have enjoyed the episode and can give us a rating or review, I am extremely grateful to you for that. And of course, if you'd like to get involved with the show, you can go to that'swhatIcallmarketing.com/sponsor. I'd love to have a chat with you about how we can partner together. And I'm so grateful to all the people that have worked with That's What I Call Marketing. It's all started with a great conversation. So I'd love to have a chat with you and see how we can work together. So listen, until the next episode, thank you so much for tuning in. From me, your host, Conor Byrne. Take care.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.